I want you to remember a time when you've done something wrong. Let's take something most of us have done. Looked at our phone whilst driving, not paid for, stolen, that plastic bag at the supermarket. You've done it. Now I want you to remember that from this moment on, it defines you. Every time you get into a serious relationship, you have to disclose. You looked at your phone. You stole that bag. Every time you volunteer at your children's school, it's brought up and you're judged for it. Every time you see a healthcare professional for a blood test or a scan, you have to explain away what you did in that one momentary lapse of judgment. And every time you apply for a job, your employer knows about it before you even go for an interview. And they can refuse to interview you because of it. A black mark on the white sheet of your life. I want you to hold on to that thought, and I want to tell you a story. My story. As I stand before you today, what do you see? A confident person, a mother of 3, slightly crazy, unbrushed hair. Had I met you 14 years ago, it would have been a different story. You see, as I grew up, in my early teens, I just didn't fit in. Too different from my siblings, my family, too different from the kids my age, and too different from the older ones. I was like twilight, not quite night or day. Awkward and clumsy in a way that they and I didn't understand. A week before my 15th birthday, I started dating a boy 2 years older than me. He treated me like a princess. He paid for taxis to pick me up and take me home. He bought me expensive perfume and jewellery. He accepted me for all my flaws and all my awkwardness, and he made me feel safe, like I mattered. When I was 16, we moved in together into a beautiful flat in a nice part of town. God, I loved that flat. A place that I could truly call my own, where I fit in, where I belonged. Not long after we moved in, I noticed that he was never home. He'd go to work, he'd come home late, and he'd say he was tired and he'd go to bed. This boy, who loved me, no longer had time for me in his life. I no longer fit in. I wanted to know why. So I demanded that he tell me why I no longer fit into his life, why he was neglecting me. I could never have imagined that he'd tell me that he'd started taking heroin and that he was spending every day buying it and using it and hiding it from me. I was devastated. I knew what happened to people who took heroin. They died. A painful and disgraceful death. They lost their friends and their families, and they ended up alone and dying. This couldn't happen to the boy I loved. I was a rescuer. I was also a child. My love could conquer all. I was a kid. And so I told him he didn't need to hide it from me. He could use in our home, in our sanctuary, where I could keep him safe. And so he started taking heroin in our front room that I kept so clean and tidy. What the Just Say No adverts hadn't told me was that he'd smoke this drug on the foil and he'd fall asleep. There were no needles. He didn't look like he was dying. And he'd smoke the drug on the foil and fall asleep, and I'd be left alone. But not alone. Still not fitting in. And so I told him I wanted to try this drug. I wanted to fit back in. He went out the next day and he bought £25 worth of heroin, which was the smallest amount you could buy. And as I smoked it on the foil that first time, I felt like I was back attached. That £25 worth lasted 2 weeks. 14 days, 2 weeks. And when it ran out, we bought some more. I wasn't worried about becoming an addict. I had a job. I was in school. He had a good job. I was intelligent. I didn't have time to be an addict. Anyway, addicts spent all their money on drugs, and we'd only spent £25 in 2 weeks. Only that next £25 worth only lasted 11 days. And after those 11 days, I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to take it anymore. I'd taken it for 25 days straight. Needed a break. I couldn't sleep that night. And my boyfriend knew what would help me sleep. Some drugs, some heroin. So we bought some more. I don't remember much about that time, but I do remember 6 months later, standing in the kitchen of the flat that I loved that we hadn't paid the rent on because we'd spent it all on heroin. And I was withdrawing, I was shivering and I was shaking with sweat pouring down me and I was vomiting. And I fell back against the cupboards and I slid to the floor, literally floored by the sudden realization I was a heroin addict. How did that happen? No one wakes up one day and decides to be an addict. It just happens. One small decision after another. By the time I was 18, I was injecting hundreds of pounds worth a week, sometimes in a day. I left my boyfriend, and having lost faith in my own ability to make decisions, I got with a man who said he would save me from my addiction. This man terrified me. He ruled what I could wear, where I went, and who I spoke to. He broke my nose twice. And when he found out I was pregnant, he tried to beat the baby out of my stomach with a Hoover pipe. The violence escalated. He locked me out of the house naked in the snow. He'd beat me whilst I was breastfeeding my son, and he started to strangle me. And it was after one of these episodes when I woke up with my son screaming underneath me, I had an epiphany. He was going to kill me. Or I'd have to kill him to escape. And so I left. And alone in a hostel, with no money, no benefits, no food, a 1-year-old, and a drug habit, I did what any addict does. to fund their drugs, I turned to crime. Crime became a way of life: shoplifting, theft, stolen goods, anything really, to fund the next hit of drugs. In and out of police cells, a revolving door of crime, until eventually, weighing 5.5 stone, literally half the person I am now, I exhausted the court's patience. I jumped bail for about the 6th time, and I was remanded into prison. By trying to fit in, I had removed myself from society into a subculture, and I no longer wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be an addict. Whilst I was in prison, I found this little bit of peace. I glimpsed a different life. I saw that rehabilitation was possible, even for someone like me. I'd like to say I turned my life around immediately, but I didn't. But what it did do was give me the opportunity to see that I could change. And I was given the opportunity to volunteer with other addicts, and I grasped it with both hands. That led to a series of opportunities. Today, I'm responsible for the mental health needs of offenders and the national implementation of a new service for offenders. I work at weekends on frontline ambulances as an emergency care assistant. I am rehabilitation personified. And so whilst I believe that I'm rehabilitated and that rehabilitation is the key to changing lives, there's a fundamental flaw in our system. We spend £800 million a year of health money. We spend it in schools, we spend it in probation services, we spend it in prisons, hospitals and communities. And we do it with the express intent of rehabilitating addicts, of turning their lives around. We talk about reintegration, but we don't really believe in that, do we? I want you to imagine your loved one is having a cardiac arrest. They are dying in front of your eyes. You need help urgently, and you call 999, and the ambulance crew arrive at your door with the skills, the equipment, and the ability to save your loved one. Only one of that crew is an ex-drug addict with 33 criminal convictions. They've lied, they've stolen, and they've spent time in prison. Would you believe that the treatment that the NHS had paid for had worked? Would you believe they were rehabilitated? Would you let them into your house to support you, comfort you, administer drugs? Why talk about rehabilitation if we don't honestly believe in it? Because if we did, I wouldn't have been suspended from my job in the ambulance service after 18 months without incident, when a change in processes meant that my past track record, my proven capacity to do the job, was ignored. And on a paper-based risk assessment by someone who's never met me, who never took the time to hear how I was rehabilitated, responded according to a set of judgments and policies set by the very organisation that pays for the treatment of addicts, the NHS. The very people who won't put their money where their mouth is. If I'd broken my arms in the past, and for one period of time had lost the ability to use them, would you be able to discriminate against me like this? Would you be able to decide that I couldn't do my job just because for one period of time I'd been unable to use my arms? Would you not give me a job because of that? But because I suffered from a potentially fatal disease that kills hundreds of people every year, that left scars on me, physically, emotionally, criminologically, I'm never allowed to forget. Is that right? I've been incredibly lucky. I've had the good fortune to meet and work for some amazing people who were able to see past the file of papers that describes me in a way that I no longer recognise myself. But I'm the exception to the rule. I'm one of the fortunate ones. Most addicts who've been treated in our addiction services aren't as lucky as I am. And I get it. The risk might seem so big. It's so scary. What if you give this person a job and they relapse? What if they steal from a patient, from you? What if they break your trust? But what if they don't? What if they are the one person who goes on to save someone's life, your child's life, your mother's life? The NHS, who employ 1.5 million people, need to do more. We need to walk the talk of rehabilitation. It is not enough to tell people they can rehabilitate, they can change, if the second they apply for our very own job adverts, we slam the door in their face. We tell them, you should get a job. It'll help you, but not with us. And if we don't truly believe in rehabilitation, then why are we raising their hopes? It's not right, it's not fair, and it's a waste of that £800 million a year. So I want you to go back to the picture I left in your head earlier. Your loved one is dying. They need help. The ambulance crew arrive at your door with the skills, the knowledge, the past track record to save them. Would you let them treat your father, your mother, or your child? Would you care about their past? Would you rather there was no one there to help at all? But mostly, would you employ them? Thank you.